We are going to answer on the judgment seat if our children are lost or not. This is Mike from Catholic Treehouse, and I'd like to welcome you to the Saint in Progress podcast, your source for inspiration, information, and directions for your soul's journey back home to the Father's house. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and most importantly, share the show. As a reminder, your financial support is how we keep the lights on in the treehouse. You can support us by buying a book or rosary from our store, or by becoming a paid subscriber on Substack. You can find more information on all these things at saintinprogress.com or catholictreehouse.com. Let's get started. Hello, fellow Saints in Progress. Welcome to episode 12 of the Saint in Progress podcast. This is Mike from Catholic Treehouse, and boy, let me tell you what, it's been a very, very busy week in the Treehouse. First off, we're getting ready for the men's conference. That's February 22nd, so cranking out rosaries and getting all my inventory together and getting everything ready for that. But also, most importantly, we just published, available on Amazon, Kevin Lowry's book, Honor Thy Wife. It's awesome. It's beautifully written and did a great job of putting it together and making it look beautiful. So check that out. You can go to catholictreehouse.com or honorthywife.com, or you can just find it on Amazon. It's real simple. You just type in Honor Thy Wife. It pops up. It should be the top listing. Right now, as of this recording, it is the number one new seller, number one new release, I should say, in the Catholic self-help section. And I think overall sales in that Catholic self-help section, it's the number 5 title. So it's selling really well, very popular. So be sure to check that out. I am very much looking forward to the men's conference. I know that a lot of the people who listen to this show are attendees there, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you and saying hi. It's just a fun time. It's a very spiritually refreshing time. I love to talk to people and see how my books, rosaries, podcasts, all this stuff is impacting their lives and affecting their lives. And it's just nice to meet the people who are on the other side of things. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about passengers and pit stops. So I'm going to be continuing to push the analogy of the road trip back home to the Father's house with this episode, and just in general, because our entire lives, if we're saints in progress, we are taking that trip back home to the Father's house. That's what I outlined in episode 1, so I'm going to stick with that. And I don't want to get too heavy-handed with it, but I think it's something that everyone can relate to, and I think it's something that really allows us to take these concepts and apply them to our spiritual journey home. Again, we're talking about passengers and pit stops. In our car, so to speak, on our road trip back home, we're not by ourselves. We have other people with us. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about the neighbors, the coworkers, so on and so forth. They might be on the same road. Maybe they're not even on the same road, but you see the cars anyways. But what I'm talking about are the people who are most directly in your car that you're trying to keep on the same road. So if you're married, that would be your spouse. And if you have kids, that would be your kids. So let's talk about them in this episode. And one of the things that I love about the Catholic Church is the emphasis that it puts on the foundations of marriage, how important marriage is in society, the importance of the covenantal relationship, and how it mirrors the relationship between the church and her bride, Jesus Christ, and also the importance of husband and wife working to get each other to heaven. And to that end, I'm going to introduce you to a couple tour guides today. First up is Blessed Karl of Austria. He was the last emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. His uncle, you probably recognize his name. It's Archduke Ferdinand. He was the one who was assassinated that started World War I. Now, there are some theories about why he was assassinated. Some say that it was a Freemasonic plot that came about because of Archduke Ferdinand's protection of the inviolability of marriage. You can go down those rabbit holes if you want to. I'm not going to get into that on this show. But ultimately, what we're going to talk about is Blessed Karl. You see, on the eve of his wedding, he told his bride-to-be that now we must get each other to heaven. And he lived that his entire life. And then, sadly, it was a very short life. You see, as Emperor of Austria, he actually led his troops into battle. He didn't sit back at home and let other generals lead things. He was a true emperor in the classic term of he cared about everybody in his empire. And so he was on the front lines. Now, he didn't get killed in battle, but when he came home, political things happened and so on and so forth, and eventually he was forced into exile. He died at only 34 years old from pneumonia in exile. But his enduring wish was to get his bride to heaven and that they would help each other get to heaven, which I think is just beautiful. So you can look him up. There's lots of information on him. I think it's emperorkarl.com or emperorkarl.org. I'll throw that in the show notes. The other person I want to introduce you to, the other tour guide, is Blessed Elisabetta Canori Mora. Okay, so here is her story from the Saint Challenge. So if you don't have a copy of the Saint Challenge, again, I highly recommend you pick it up. But her feast day was actually just a few days ago, earlier this week. So here's her story. Elisabetta Primori was born in Italy in 1774. At the age of 22, she married a lawyer named Cristoforo Mora, who was a very jealous and abusive husband. Together, they had 4 daughters, 2 of whom died as infants. Cristoforo began an adulterous affair, spent the family's money on his mistress, and then abandoned Elisabetta and his 2 daughters in a state of poverty. Elisabetta sold almost everything she had to support herself and her children, but her saintly life had just begun. She had several prophetic ecstasies, became a Trinitarian tertiary, spent her life helping the poor and needy families, and a variety of miracles are attributed to her. She died in 1825. Blessed Elisabetta Mora said, God has entrusted to everyone the responsibility of the salvation of others in order to carry out his project of love. Elisabetta's responsibility was her husband, and she never stopped praying for him. After her death, he had a conversion of life and became a Franciscan priest. For whose salvation is God's project of love asking you to pray? So again, that was the Saint Challenge episode from earlier this week on Blessed Elisabetta Canori Mora. So again, you can see in her life how she exemplified what the church teaches in that spouses are supposed to try to get each other to heaven. So even after she died, she kept praying for her husband, and he eventually converted and became a priest. How beautiful is that? So our spouse, if we're married, is the other person in the car with us that we're supposed to have on this road trip, right? Well, who else is in the car? Well, if you have kids, your kids are in the car too. And for that, I want to tell you a little story about this other tour guide of ours, Bishop von Galen. And he's a blessed, and he was known as the Lion of Munster because he stood up to Adolf Hitler during World War II. And he was so popular with the people that Adolf Hitler didn't want all the Catholics causing a civil war while he was fighting a war against the Allies. So he kind of left him alone. Well, during World War II, and the lead up to World War II is actually 1937, Bishop von Galen was summoned by Pope Pius XI to Rome, along with some other bishops. You see, Rome had figured out what was going on, and they didn't like the direction that Germany was headed because they were closing down Catholic schools and things like this, and they knew that bad things were on the horizon. So they summoned these bishops together and they put together this encyclical, which ordinarily encyclicals are entitled in Latin. This one was entitled in German because it was written specifically to the German people. So they smuggled it into Germany because they figured that the Reich would confiscate it. And then they found faithful Catholic printers who produced about 300,000 copies of it to distribute amongst the Catholic faithful. And the Catholic faithful got hold of it, and they made their own copies using typewriters. So this is a very important document, but it's kind of hard to find. It's not like Gaudium et Spes or one of the other Vatican II documents or one of the other encyclicals that's come out with JP2 or Pope Francis or Benedict XVI or whatever. So I did the digging. I found it. Again, I'll link it in the show notes for the paid subscribers. It's a wonderful document, but I'm going to read a section from it because it kind of sets up the next section of this podcast of what I want to talk about. So here it goes. At present, the rights and duties of Catholic parents as regards to the education of the children entrusted to them by God are being attacked in an incredibly evil manner. When it is sought with an anti-Christian education to profane the tabernacles of children's souls, sanctified by baptism, then it is the duty of every professing Christian to separate clearly from the other side, as well as to keep his conscience clear of any culpable cooperation of such dreadful work and corruption. The more the enemy attempts to deny or disguise his shameful aims, the more necessary it is to adopt an attitude of mistrust and suspicious vigilance, encouraged by bitter experience. The formal preservation of religious instruction, especially when controlled and shackled by incompetent people in the atmosphere of a school that works systematically and individually against religion, can never be a justification for a believing Christian to give his free approval to such a school that aims at destroying religion. Wow, that's pretty powerful, right? But it continues even more powerfully. Catholic parents, keep this in mind. No earthly power can release you from the divine responsibility which unites you to your children. No one will be able to reply for you to God Almighty when He asks, "Where are those whom I have entrusted to you?" Let each one of you be able to reply, "I have not lost any of those you have entrusted to me." That's pretty convincing, isn't it? Or should I say pretty convicting? If we do an honest assessment of how we are parenting our children, are we truly taking that to heart? That we are going to answer on the judgment seat if our children are lost or not. So one of the things I've been doing recently is the content of a lot of the podcasts I listen to, and I listen to a lot, but one of the things I've noticed, I should say, about these different episodes is that there seems to be a growing theme of the guests talking about spiritual warfare. Now, yes, I do listen to a fair number of exorcists and things like that because I find the spiritual warfare, the spiritual battle very intriguing. But more and more, it's popping up with more and more people, guests, so on and so forth, talking about this as being a growing problem. Priests are saying it is a growing problem. Not just exorcists, regular priests are saying that spiritual warfare, attacks, and that kind of thing are a growing problem in our society. And one of the exorcists that I listened to, his name is Father Ripperger. He's the one who actually started me down the path of listening to this kind of stuff. Someone recommended one of his videos or something like that, and I watched it. I was like, "Well, this is kind of interesting." I started looking for more. So one of the things that he said once was the demon's goal is the children. That really hit a nerve with me. The demon's goal is the children. And so I have that echoing in my head when I'm listening to all these other podcast guests talk about things like the fact that we are no longer atheistic, that we're moving as a society towards outright occultism. And one of Father Ripperger's video series, there's 3 videos, and again, I'll link to these in the show notes for the paid subscribers. There's one of them called Spiritual Warfare and Marriage. In video 3 of 3, he has this quote, which I thought was really, really important. He says this: "The demons will pick at people, at men, to get them to pursue a life of pleasure and peace rather than maintaining the right order. In the end, though, the children pay the price. So does the wife, ultimately." So men, step up. You need to be St. Joseph. One of his titles is Terror of Demons. So you need to be the terror of demons for your house. Your wife and your kids are depending upon you. And wives, if your husband isn't stepping up to that role, kick him in the butt. Remind him of that role. Tell him that he owes it to you and he owes it to the kids to step up and be that terror of demons for the household. And wives, if your husband isn't willing to step up and do that, well, then maybe you need to be like Blessed Elisabetta Canori Mora. And you need to be the one who takes control of the spiritual reins. You take the wheel of the car because your husband's not driving. Either way, the parents are responsible for the souls of their children. This isn't just a problem of atheism or agnosticism. What I'm hearing on these podcasts, that people are talking about how it is actually outright occultism. So how do we battle that in our houses? How do we make sure that everyone, especially our kids, are on the right road? Well, the first thing is we don't let the kids drive, especially teenagers. If you look into brain physiology and all that, the teenage brain, the frontal lobes, the part that's responsible for making rational decisions, weighing consequences, things like that, it's not fully developed until the early to mid 20s. And more to the point, some of the mistakes that they could make could be dangerous to their souls. So don't let the kids drive. But we also need to remember that occasionally we need to take pit stops. Just because you can keep driving doesn't mean someone else doesn't have to go to the bathroom or needs food or just needs to stretch their legs. Sometimes that pit stop can be a quick in and out. Sometimes it needs to be a Cracker Barrel where you shop around a little bit, you buy a t-shirt and some rock candy and one of those little metal wire thing, little puzzle things you try to figure out how to get the two pieces apart. We need to remember that we have to pull, not push. That's one thing that my wife reminds me of quite frequently when it comes to how things run in the household. Now, there is something else that the church hasn't talked about in a while, and that is that the parents need to set the cult and the code, is what it's called. The cult is the day-to-day living of the faith. The code is following the laws as set forth by Mother Church. So the cult would be, okay, we as a family say the rosary every night after dinner. And the code is, even though we're on vacation, we're still going to Mass on Sunday. And during Lent, we're going to abstain from meat on Fridays. So when it comes to the code, you need to push. No exceptions. This is what the church says. This is what we do. But when it comes to the cult, how you practice things in your home, that's when you need to lead by example and to pull. We need to show our children how to live the faith by our own prayerfulness, by our own sacrifice, by our own fasting, by our own going to Eucharistic adoration. When possible, holding them, when necessary, pushing them. Sometimes make it optional, sometimes drag them along. So however you decide to balance the cult and the code in your home, stick to the code, but establish a good cult of how to live the faith, and most importantly, how to engage in spiritual warfare, because that is what we're doing. Whether you like it or not, folks, you are in a battle. You can't pick this one. You can't sit on the sidelines. You are in a spiritual warfare battle right now, every day, from the time you wake up until the time you go to bed. So buckle up. It's going to get hairy. So that's it for this week, my fellow saints in progress. As I mentioned, we got that new book out from Kevin Lowry, Honor Thy Wife. Be sure to check it out. And let me tell you something. It's got some amazing reviews from the likes of Father John Riccardo, Father Dave Pavanka, Mike Aquilina, and more. It's a really, really fabulous book, and I hope you check it out. HonorThyWife.com or CatholicTreehouse.com, where you can also pick up a Saint in Progress t-shirt for yourself or somebody else in a variety of sizes and colors. And of course, we have books and rosaries as well. If you're in the Columbus area or Central Ohio area, be sure to check us out at the Columbus Catholic Men's Conference on February 22nd. We'll have our table there. That's it for this week. Next week, we'll be talking about the monotony of piety. So be sure to tune in. Have a blessed week. And remember, you are a saint in progress, so go out there and be a saint.